Okay, so we're up to the Philadelphia Flyers when it comes to team histories, and the ridiculousness of their trades is over here, and it looks like Egyptian hieroglyphics to me, so I know people on cameras are going to be, or on watching this on their phones are going to be like, what? Worry about it, I'll read it out to you. I knew it was going to be bad before I even started, so I was like, alright, Shannon, use a marker that you can write small, and just get through it, and then you can lead people through their trade history, because it's remarkable how Philadelphia has built and tore themselves down through trade, and sometimes they tear themselves down in the right way, and sometimes not so much. So when you look at the Philadelphia Flyers, what comes to mind? Right, the Broad Street Bullies. The fact that this was the 1967 expansion team that did it the right way and became Stanley Cup champions the soonest. And they were intimidating, and they completely changed the game forever. And, well, for at least 20, 25 years, right? And now the game's slowly becoming something completely different. That being said, when you look at their all-time points leader, Bobby Clarke is unsurprising as number one with 358 goals, 852 assists, 1,210 points. Bill Barber next up with 420 goals, 463 assists, 883 points. They're both in the Hall of Fame. Brian Propp is not. 360 goals, 480 assists, 849 points. I would be perfectly fine with Brian Propp going in the Hall. It's not going to happen. Claude Giroux is next up. 236 goals, 526 assists, 762 points. Rick McLeish, 328 goals, 369 assists, 697 points. Eric Lindros, 290 goals, 369 assists, 659 points. Tim Kerr, I would also think he should be just Hall of Fame. In. Done. One of the best power play players that ever existed, and just his goal scoring was scary. 363 goals, 287 assists, 650 points. John LeClair, 333 goals, 310 assists, 643 points. Mark Recchi, 232 goals, 395 assists, 627 points. Rod Brindamore, 235 goals, 366 assists, 601 points. What stands out is, if you remember a couple videos back when I did the New York Rangers top 10 list, to get into their top 10, it required fewer points than Philadelphia. Philadelphia's had a nice run, and they keep players around for a long time. They don't trade guys out very often. They keep things together. And to prove that, Jakub Voracek currently is 96 points away from being in the top 10. I think he has 505 points as a Flyer right now. So he's going to get into the top 10, likely early, not this coming season, but the year after. Wins leaders: Ron Hextall, 240. Bernie Parent, 231. Steve Mason, 104. Wayne Stevenson, 93. And tied with 92 wins are Bob Froese and Roman Cechmanek. Now, for people following along at home, Carter Hart only has 16. So while he is the hero of the team, he currently only has 16. So the fans are excited. I get that. We'll see if he ends up on this list within the next, I'll say, 3 years. I'll say three years for him to get 76 wins, maybe 2.5 years to get 76 wins and end up on this chart, and bump the guys tied for 5th off the board. Coaching wins: Fred Shero leads there with 308. Mike Keenan's next with 190. Peter Laviolette, 145. Pat Quinn, 141. And Dave Haxtell, 134 for 5th spot on the overall wins list. What stands out here is Fred Shero, tough as nails, who coached the Broad Street Bullies, and Mike Keenan, also a tough as nails, Iron Mike as he was called, coach for the Philadelphia Flyers. Likely would have been number one on this, other than the fact that Mike Keenan doesn't work well with others and usually wears out his welcome kind of quickly. That being said, the wins are there. He proves himself. Playoffs. They make the playoffs 39 out of 51 seasons played so far. They've had the Stanley Cup, of course, twice. Those are back-to-back years of 1974 and 1975. Stanley Cup finals, these guys go to the finals a lot. 80, 85, 87, 97, and 2010. So that's 5 in a row that they've made it to the finals and failed to win the Stanley Cup. And for Flyers fans, that's the storyline they really want to change as soon as possible. The good news for them is they didn't make the playoffs at all between 1990 and 94. But other than that, they've never missed the playoffs twice in a row. Before that, after that, they've never missed the playoffs 2 years in a row. They just missed the playoffs in 2019. So if you're going, I'm thinking they should get back in 2020, you're probably thinking the right way, because historically this team does not miss the playoffs for repeat seasons. And the year that they drafted James Van Riemsdyk, that team looked miserable, awful, horrible, and the next year they're right back in the playoffs like nothing happened. This is Philadelphia. This is how they do things. Team captains, Lou Angotti is their captain, 67-68, and then he gets traded away, so Ed Van Impe becomes their captain from 68 to 73. Bobby Clarke is their captain from 72 to 79 and 82 to 84. Mel Bridgman, 79 to 82. Bill Barber from 81 to 83. Dave Poulin from 84 to 90. Ron Sutter, 89 to 91. Rick Tocchet, 91-92. Kevin Dineen, 93-94. Eric Lindros, 94 to 2000, I should say. Eric Desjardins, 99 to 2002. Keith Primo, 2001 to 2006. Darian Hatcher, also 2005-2006. Shared the captaincy there. 2006-2007, Peter Forsberg was captain. 2007 to 2008, Jason Smith. 2008 to 2011, it was Mike Richards. 2011 to 2012, it was Chris Pronger. And then since 2012, it has been Claude Giroux. He's been the face of the franchise, and he is the member of the Flyers, one of the members of the Flyers who kind of resembles Gritty. You knew I had to get a mention of Gritty in there, right? And the number of Flyers that kind of sort of look like the mascot. It's there, and eventually, Gritty's going to take the ice and play a game. They'll just take one of the Flyers and dress him up as the mascot and go, all right, this is our latest marketing idea, to which that player will go, wait, I please don't. Yeah, no, it's fine. Just put on the head. I don't want to put on the head. And he'll be thinking in his mind, I never thought coming up through juniors I'd ever be told by a coach or a trainer to put on the head. So draft picks. They've drafted in the top 10 a number of times. They've only drafted first overall once. And they did it with a draft pick that wasn't their own. So 1967, they draft 5th. That's Serge Bernier. 1968, they draft 8th. That's Lou Morrison. 1969, they draft 6th. That's Bill Courier. 1971, they draft 8th, Larry Wright, and 9th, that's Pierre Plante. 1972, drafting 7th, they get Bill Barber. 1975, drafting 1st, Mel Bridgman. 1978, drafting 6th, Ben Wilson, and 7th, Ken Lensman. 1982, they draft 4th, they get Ron Sutter. 1990, they draft 4th again, they get Mike Recchi. 1991, they draft 6th, Peter Forsberg. 1992, they draft 7th, and it's Ryan Sittler. Ryan Sittler, more of a trivia answer at this stage than remembered as a player. He was picked for his name. He's one of those guys who gets picked and you go, and you look back years later and you go, why did this guy get picked there? Because of Sittler. So they were taking a bit of a reach there with the idea that, hey, if he becomes anything like, it didn't happen. 2002, drafting 4th, Jani Pitkanen. 2007, drafting 2nd, as I said, James Van Riemsdyk. 2011, drafting 8th, Sean Couturier. That wasn't their pick either. 2015, drafting 7th, they get Ivan Provorov. And then drafting 2nd in 2017, Nolan Patrick. That is the highest they've ever drafted with their own pick. And, of course, they won a lottery to get that number 2 pick. They wouldn't have drafted 2nd overall if not for the lottery. But that's fine. There are people who don't like the lottery. I think it works just perfectly. It means that you don't tank and get the number 1 pick. Anything that makes sure that a team can't just tank and get the number 1 pick, I'm okay with that system. I know there's people who don't like it. But for Philly, they never really had to do a tank to become champs or to get to a Stanley Cup final. They never fully embraced a tank. Like I said, they've never missed the playoffs in back-to-back years other than from 90 through 94. Now, getting to their trade history. Go ahead, get yourself a cup of coffee, get yourself a pop. Go ahead and pause this here and go get yourself something to do because, wow. And I went from 67 till now, but I omitted all of the stuff from 67 through 70 because they were minor deals, and I knew there was a lot of deals to come. January 31st, 1971, Philadelphia gets Bruce Gamble, not Campbell, Gamble. Mike Walton in a 1971 first, which they used to draft Pierre Plante. Toronto gets Bernie Parent and a 1971 second, which they used to draft Rick Kehoe. Now, of course, Kehoe goes on to have a really solid career with Pittsburgh, not Toronto. But this is a deal that you could say kind of favors Toronto, except Bernie Parent was going to the WHA. January 31st as well, 1971, Philadelphia acquires Rick McLeish and Danny Schock. Boston gets Mike Walton. So Walton is a member of the Philadelphia Flyers for about that long. March 5th, 1973, Philadelphia gets Terry Crisp. New York Islanders get Jean Potvin and Glenn Irwin. Now, Jean Potvin is the brother of Denny Potvin. So, nice trade there. And Terry Crisp, one of the tough players that, just blends in with the Philadelphia locker room. 1973 still, May 15th of that year. They get the 1973 second-round pick, and Bernie Parent comes back to Philadelphia's hands. Toronto gets a 1973 first, Doug Favell and Wooly Brossart. So Favell, not a bad goaltender, but Parent is the better goaltender. May 24th, 1974, Philadelphia gets Reggie Leach. And the California Golden Seals get Al McAdam, Larry Wright, a 1974 first, and George Pursuit is added after. I'm going to go out on a limb and say, yeah, that's a lot of guys, but Philadelphia gets the best player and wins that deal. June 3rd, 1975, Philadelphia gets a 1975 first-round pick from Washington. That becomes number 1 overall, and they use it to draft Mel Bridgman. Washington gets Bill Clement, Don McLean, and a 1975 first. And I wonder how many times Don McLean had to deal with people singing American Pie when they found out his name, or asking him to sing it. Had to be obnoxious. March 8th, I should say, 1976. Philadelphia gets Gary Ennis, a 1977 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th picks. None of them become anything major, but they also get an 8th round pick, which becomes Pete Peters. Pittsburgh gets Bobby Taylor and Ed Van Impe. So Pittsburgh just went, well, from the 8th round on, we really don't care, so we'll give you everything. Yes, there were 12 rounds in the draft. That was just how things worked, and yes, teams could just look and go, forget it. There's nothing else we want in the prospects. And Philadelphia went, all right, well, we'll take 5 extra draft picks, and one of them they hit on, which was Pete Peters. June 2nd, 1978, Philadelphia gets a 1978 first-round pick from the Rangers, which they used to draft Ken Linsman. The New York Rangers get coach Fred Shero. The Rangers love trading for coaches, don't they? And that's one of those weird ones. It's really one of those weird ones. The Rangers are involved in a lot of weird trades, and that's one of them. July 3rd, 1981, Philadelphia gets Ray Allison, Fred Arthur, a 1982 second, which they used to draft Ron Sutter, and a 3rd-round pick. Hartford gets Don Gillen, Rick McLeish, Blake Wesley, a 1982 first, which they used to draft Paul Lawless, 1982 second, and a 3rd, which becomes Kevin Dineen. So, a lot of names in there. Pretty even trade overall, I guess. Ron Sutter, pretty darn solid player for the Philadelphia Flyers. June 9th, 1982, Philadelphia acquires Brad McCrimmon. Boston gets Pete Peters. Peters would have heroic seasons for Boston. McCrimmon would play pretty well for Philly. Things go pretty well for both sides in that deal. August 19th, 1982, Philadelphia gets Mark Howe, a 1983 third, Derek Smith. Hartford gets Greg C. Adams, not to be mistaken with the Greg Adams who played for Vancouver first. They both played on the Canucks. That was weird. Then it became Gus Adams and Greg C. Adams. Ken Linsman, a 1983 first and a 3rd. So that's a lot of parts. But Mark Howe, that's a pretty major acquisition for Philadelphia. January 20th, 1982. So going back, and I wanted these two trades together. Philadelphia acquires Daryl Sittler. Toronto gets Rich Costello, Ken Strong, and a 1982 second named Peter Inachak. Did I mention Toronto really wanted to just get rid of Daryl Sittler? They did. But he doesn't last as a member of the Philadelphia Flyers either, because October 10th of 1984, so barely 2 years later, he is traded. Philadelphia acquires Murray Craven and Joe Patterson from Detroit in return for Daryl Sittler. So that's a trade that Philadelphia wins going away, because by the time Sittler hits Detroit, yeah, he's done. His career is basically finished. He has no gas left in the tank whatsoever. December 18th, 1986, Philadelphia acquires Shel Samuelson, a 1989 second-round pick. The Rangers get Bob Froese. So they get their goaltender, and Philadelphia gets themselves a guy in Shel Samuelson. Pretty tough blue liner. So when you look up toughest blue liners who played in the game, I'm not saying Samuelson's there, but you might see his picture on the page somewhere. March 6, 1989, Philadelphia acquires Ken Wregget. Toronto gets 2 1989 first-round draft picks, but they draft Steve Bancroft and Rob Pearson with those draft picks. So Philadelphia gives up 2 firsts for Ken Wregget, which to this day you say, well, they gave up 2 firsts for Ken Wregget, but those firsts didn't really hurt them overall. May 30th, 1991, Philadelphia acquires Corey Foster, Dave Brown, one of the toughest players, Yari Curry. Edmonton gets Scott Mellenby, Craig Fisher, and Craig Berube. So a couple of Craigs go that way, and Berube's pretty darn tough too. So Berube for Brown, that's a tough trade. But on the same day, Yari Curry doesn't stay in Philly. So if you're going, when was Yari Curry in Philly? Again, about 5 minutes, about as long as Mike Walton. 1991, Fourth is acquired by Philly along with Steve Casper and Steve Duchesne. LA gets Jeff Chikrin and Yari Curry. So Philadelphia added Corey Foster, Dave Brown, Steve Casper, Steve Duchesne, and a 1991 Fourth. Not a bad haul overall. And Yari Curry, who is going to LA, he's not the same Yari Curry he was in the 80s. Now, September 22nd of 1991, Philadelphia acquires Rod Brindamore and Dan Quinn. St. Louis gets Murray Barron and Ron Sutter. I'm going to go out on a limb and say Philadelphia wins this deal. This is, of course, when St. Louis was looking to win a Stanley Cup and pick up whatever they could to get there. And Philadelphia just robbed them by getting Rod Brindamore. Just absolute robbery. November 13th, 1991, Kevin Dineen joins the Flyers. Hartford gets Murray Craven and a 1992 fourth-round pick. February 19th, 1992, Philadelphia acquires Brian Benning, Mark Recchi, and a 1992 first, which they used to draft Jason Bowen. Pittsburgh acquires Shel Samuelson, Rick Tocchet, Ken Wregget, and a 1993 third. So, pretty good move there. They set up Pittsburgh for their second straight Stanley Cup. Not intentionally. I'm sure they're not looking at going, hey, we hope Pittsburgh wins the Stanley Cup here in Philly, so we'll go ahead and throw you guys some players that'll get you there. But they did win the Cup in 92, so that's what happened. June 30th, 1992, Philadelphia says, all right, we've had enough. We got too many players in this locker room. How can we get rid of them? I know. We'll trade them all for Eric Lindros. I'm only partly kidding. They traded 9 assets for Eric Lindros. 9. Now, I say this a lot, but think about it. If a team did this now, you're calling them crazy. And I don't care if it's a number 1 draft pick. I don't care which number 1 draft pick it is. I don't even care if it would have been Sidney Crosby back in 2005. You trade 9, and it's not just 9. It's look at who they are. Quebec gets Steve Duchesne, really good quarterback on the blue line. Peter Forsberg, one of the hottest young prospects in the game. Ron Hextall, a starting goaltender. Kerry Huffman, decent top 6 defenseman. Mike Recchi, another good young player who'd only been drafted a couple years before in the first round, top 5. A 1993 first, which becomes Jocelyn Thibault. Chris Simon is a throw-in after. Simon, a good, tough young player. 1994 first, which becomes Nolan Baumgartner, drafted 10th overall. And $15 million. So after you've got all these trades and draft picks, Quebec's going, yeah, but $15 million would make this work. So it's a crazy amount of picks, players, and cash that ends up going Quebec's way. And to repay their fans for all of this, they moved to Colorado and win the Stanley Cup. And of course, Jocelyn Thibault is part of the package they use to bring in Patrick Roy. So you can argue that first-round draft pick also helped Colorado win the Stanley Cup. The Flyers, they were givers that year. September 22nd, 1994, Philadelphia acquires Ron Hextall back via the New York Islanders. He didn't last very long in Quebec. And a 1995 sixth-round pick, the Islanders get Tommy Soderstrom. So Hextall's market value drops quite markedly after he leaves Philly, and then he ends up going back. February 9th, 1995, Philadelphia acquires Eric Desjardins, Gilbert Dion, and John LeClair. This move is... Oh, Montreal fans, cover your ears for a second. Montreal gets Mark Recchi in a 1995 third. Just Desjardins and LeClair. They are such a huge part of what happens with Philly in the late 90s, Stanley Cup final run and all that. Gilbert Dion, he didn't work out at the NHL level, but nice throw-in in this trade. And LeClair, of course, becomes a monster for Philadelphia. So for Montreal, it's a trade that they ended up getting Recchi. They got the big name there, but looking back in hindsight, wasn't really worth it. I think the biggest shock at the time was that Desjardins was involved in that. All right. July 12th, 1995, the Colorado Avalanche trade Garth Snow, to Philadelphia, and all they get back is a third and a sixth in the 96 draft. Garth Snow becomes a pretty good goaltender for Philly, and they'll flip him for another goaltender as well. March 15th, 1996, Philadelphia acquires Dale Hawerchuk. St. Louis gets Craig McTavish. So McTavish goes to St. Louis because that's where Mike Keenan is, and they get Hawerchuk out of that deal. August 20th, 1997, Philadelphia acquires a first-round draft pick in 98, which they used to draft Simon Gagne, a 1999 first, a 2000 first-round pick, which becomes Justin Williams, and a 2001 first, which becomes Tim Gleason. They'll trade that draft pick later. Tampa Bay gets Carl Dykhouse and Mikhail Renberg. So Tampa gets a couple of assets and gives up a ton of future. Just future, we don't need a future, we're good. And that's crazy. And again, I don't see this trade happening now. I don't see a team giving up 4 first-round draft picks for 2 players. I can see 4 first-round... We talk about 4 first-rounders not being worth it for these really good young restricted free agents. Here's Tampa throwing away 4 first-round draft picks when they're not even a contender for a Stanley Cup yet. It's insane. March 4th, 1998, Philadelphia acquires Sean Burke. Vancouver gets Garth Snow. Snow, of course, would be a starter for Vancouver after that. However, only for a year and a half, I think it was, before Potvin gets there. Whereas Burke, kind of a rental for Philly, at least at the beginning. I don't remember how long he stayed in Philly, but between the two, Burke was the better goaltender. You just always got the feeling that Burke got traded frequently for a reason. Anyways, March 10th, 1999, Philadelphia acquires Mark Recchi. Montreal gets Danis Zubris, 1999 second, and a 2006 round pick. So somehow Montreal loses a trade where they get Recchi, and then they lose the trade where they trade Recchi back. I know Zubris had a couple of good years there, but still. Anyways, so there you go. January 23rd, 2000, Philadelphia acquires Keith Primo. A 2005 round pick. Carolina gets Rod Brindamore, Jean-Marc Pelletier, and a 2002 round pick. Brindamore, of course, huge part of the Carolina Hurricanes right until this day. And Keith Primo had some good years in Philly. Sure, he played well, but I'm going to go ahead and say Carolina wins that deal. July 1st, 2001, Philadelphia gets a 2002 round pick, a 2003 first round pick, which they would use to draft Jeff Carter. And the Phoenix Coyotes get Damon Lanko. So Lanko, Phoenix felt like they needed a center. They needed a big center, and Philadelphia went, all right. And it was a first-round pick 2 years out. Watch those firsts. Jeff Carter, pretty solid career. Anyways, moving along, August 20th, 2001, Philadelphia acquires Pavel Brendel, Jan Hlavac, Kim Johnson, and a 2003 third from the New York Rangers for the rights to Eric Lindros. So Philadelphia, when they traded out Lindros, they got back Brendel and Hlavac. I think Lindros at that point, his market value dropped because of the concussions, and he hadn't played. So he'd been sitting out waiting on Philly, and the relationship between Bobby Clarke and Eric Lindros was just toxic. So I think that's why the Rangers were able to get him without giving up really a whole lot to get him. But Pavel Brendel, there was some belief that he still had the potential to become... It didn't happen. June 12th, 2002, Philadelphia acquires Robert Esch and Michael Handzus. Phoenix acquires Brian Boucher in a 2002 third. Of course, Boucher had that nice long shutout streak in Phoenix, but Esch was really solid for Philadelphia in and amongst a time after Ron Hextall where goaltenders just don't last in Philadelphia. Moving along, May 28th, 2003, Philadelphia acquires a 2004 second-round pick, which would become Brian Bickle. LA gets Roman Cechmanek. I have not seen a fall from grace like Cechmanek among goaltenders. That was quite so amazing in that he wasn't really a flash in the pan. He was in the league for a while, and then all of a sudden, it just all fell apart. And it started with a failure in the playoffs with the Flyers that led to them saying, we're just going to get rid of him. And he goes to LA, and he only lasted a year there. So, Cechmanek's on the board. He got 92 wins as a Flyer, but in the end, we'll take a pick. We'll just take a pick, take him. Which is amazing because his goals against and his save percentage weren't bad. before the trade, at least during the regular season. Postseason, things got kind of ugly. June 22nd, 2003, a trade nobody cared about at the time. Philadelphia acquires a 2004 sixth. So they're looking at the draft table and they're going, we'll just take a 6th rounder next year. San Jose gets a 7th rounder that year. So 2003 7th rounder, which they used to draft Joe Pavelski. So it's one of those trades you look at and you go, it doesn't matter. Nobody cares. Nobody would have talked about it on draft day. And we look back on it now and we go, wow, San Jose did pretty well in that 7th round draft pick. February 15th, 2007, so jumping ahead a bit. Philadelphia gets Ryan Perrant, Scotty Upshall, a 2007 first, which they would then trade, a 3rd, and Nashville gets Peter Forsberg. So Forsberg rented out to the Nashville Predators. Nashville felt in 2007 they were close. They felt they were close enough that it was time to go all in, and they went all in by acquiring Forsberg. It was a gutsy move by Nashville at the time, and it didn't end up working out. Now, that 1st round pick would be traded back to Nashville June 18th of 2007, but Philadelphia would extract quite a price in Scotty Hartnell and Kimmo Timonen. So, nice move by Philadelphia to get Ryan Perrant, Scotty Upshall, Scott Hartnell, and Kimmo Timonen. But it was obnoxious because I used to mix up Hartnell and Upshall when they were in Nashville, and then they both get traded to Philly, and I'm like, great. I have a hard time remembering which one's which. I know they're completely different players, but it was easy for me to go, did you see that goal by Upshall? And they go, you mean Hartnell? Yeah. See that goal by Hartnell? Do you mean the one by Upshall? Crap. So, yeah, that was a frustration that only I had. June 20th, 2008, Philadelphia acquires Steve Eminger, a 2008 third-round pick. Washington gets a 2008 first-round pick, and they use that first-round pick to acquire John Carlson. So, drafting John Carlson, that's a win for the Washington Capitals. June 26, 2009, Philadelphia acquires Ryan Dingle and Chris Pronger. Ryan Dingle, though, is a great name. That's a great name for a hockey player. Because, and it's a shame he didn't make it, because, Dingle with the dangles around it would have been wonderful to hear the calls of every goal. Anaheim gets Joffrey Lupul, Lucas Biza, a 2009 first, which became John Moore, and a 2010 first, which became Emerson Edom. That really fast guy who scored a bunch of goals before coming up to the NHL. He was going to be great, and he just fizzled out. Just didn't work out. I was really excited about Edom before he came up, too, and then all of a sudden, just nope. Anyways, decent trade for Philly, and of course, Pronger broke down pretty quick after that. June 23rd, 2011, Philadelphia acquires Braden Shen, Wayne Simmons, the 2011 second. LA gets Rob Bordson and Mike Richards. So, of course, Richards would go to LA and win a couple of Stanley Cups. And that same day, June 23rd, 2011, Philadelphia acquires Jakub Voracek, a 2011 first, which was used to draft Sean Couturier, a third, which became Nick Cousins. Columbus gets Jeff Carter. Disastrous trade for Columbus. Columbus would trade him to Los Angeles. And once in Los Angeles, Carter and Richards together again win Stanley Cups 2 out of 3 times that they try in LA. And so for Philadelphia, they win on the trades. They definitely win the Columbus trade, but they don't have the Stanley Cups to show for it that LA does. June 22nd, 2012, Philadelphia acquires a 2012 fourth, which became Taylor Lear, a second, which became Anthony Stolarz, a 2013 fourth. Columbus gets Sergei Bobrovsky. So it's almost as if after robbing Columbus for Jeff Carter, they went, okay, we feel bad. So we'll give you Bobrovsky. We'll just take back middling picks and just we're sorry. Here's Bobrovsky. Enjoy him. He'll probably post a bunch of shutouts and great numbers, and he's going to be great. We're sorry. That's the only explanation I can come up with for why Bobrovsky was given up on, other than he didn't play very well for Philly. And Philly, with goaltenders, it's now. Now. Why aren't you good now? Are you good now? Then you're gone. June 23rd, 2012. So a day after that trade, Philadelphia acquires Luke Schenn. Toronto gets James Van Riemsdyk. These are not great trades for Philly. Trading out Van Riemsdyk and Bobrovsky and getting back Schenn and middling draft picks. So, April 3rd, 2013, Philadelphia acquires Steve Mason from Columbus from Michael Layton and a 2015 third. Good move. Steve Mason, he's on the board here. He's the number 3 guy in wins all time with Philadelphia with 104. Mason turned it around with Philadelphia And it was kind of nice to see because Bobrovsky had gone to Columbus, pushed Mason out of a job. So Mason ends up in Philadelphia, kind of completes a trade a while later kind of thing, right? June 23rd, 2017, Philadelphia acquires Jori Lehtera. We all know the infamy now that name has with it. But a 2017 first, which became Frost, who hasn't come up yet, but he's supposed to be excellent. And a 2018 first, which is Farabee. And St. Louis gets Brayden Schenn. So St. Louis, having just won the Stanley Cup, will tell you, we win that deal. Philadelphia fans look at this deal and go, you know what? We probably don't win the Stanley Cup in the last couple of years with Brayden Schenn. And now we got Morgan Frost and Joel Farabee coming up. We could be a big deal. And these guys could be a big part of it. So the jury's still out on who necessarily wins this deal. But St. Louis will say, hey, Stanley Cup rings, we win the deal. And I can't really, I can try, but I can't really argue with that. June 14th, 2019. So now in trades just a month ago. Philadelphia gets Matt Niskanen. Washington gets Radko Gudas. I like this deal. We'll see what it does, but obviously Philadelphia felt that their young blue line needed some veteran leadership and a little bit of help offensively, and Niskanen can do that. And then June 18th, 2019, they get Justin Braun from San Jose for a 2019 second and a 2020 third. So years from now, we may look back at the second and third and say, you know what, they did really well. San Jose got really good players with those picks, but Braun is a solid addition to the top six. So Philadelphia, still trying to build up, still trying to get back to where they were in 75. And 5 times since 75, they've been close, just not quite there. So there you go, the history of the Philadelphia Flyers. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below as always. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, for all your support, and I will talk to you again soon.